Welcome to the demonstration of the Kelvin risk and validation software. So we normally start out with a model inventory, which means you have all of the models, be it tabular data or large language models, within one single inventory, and all of the data that you need on the governance side. So basically you have here, for example, technical owner, model description, training data description, all in one place. This is highly customizable. So if you have your own validation or your own governance information that you want to store, this can be very easily adapted. You also see the various history of tests that has been executed on this model, as well as a high-level overview over the different risk indicators: performance, robustness, fairness, explainability, accountability, and safety risks. Now there's two types of things you can see. One is the incident probability, and the other one is the expected number of incidents per year. If you want to go into more detail of how a certain assessment actually looked like, to get a better view on things, you'll click on this and end up in the assessment log. Now the assessment log shows which tests have been executed in the different indicators, and you have all of the different descriptions about these tests and metrics. You can directly see the unweighted scores of each of these tests and metrics. These scores are always between 0 and 1, 1 being the worst, 0 being the best, and are very much calibrated in that, very lightly said, 0.5 is always 0.5. Now you can also see as a risk tree map, which means that these are the weighted, risk-weighted indicators or risk-weighted tests, and you can directly see from the size of these pellets which is the biggest risk. So for example, of course, here it's safety and accountability, but you can see that robustness is also quite a large risk compared to fairness, for example. If you want to go into more detail, you can see which of these metrics exactly caused how much contribution to the risk in total. You also get a log of everything you've put in into the questionnaire, meaning what kind of model metrics have been executed, what the model itself was, the model version, the data version, and all of the accountability, governance, and safety information you gave in the questionnaire. Now, you also have a use case inventory. The use case inventory is really the business use case, and each use case has one or several models, so it's a 1-to-n relationship. And if you take a look at one of them, you can see that again you have all of the governance information, highly customizable. So if you want other fields, you can have other fields here, like business owner, description of the use case, purpose of the use case. And if you've executed a use case assessment, you can also see the total expected loss and the value at risk at a 95th percentile, and where this total expected loss comes from. So for example, here the reputational impact is potentially higher than the financial impact of a failure of the system. What you can also see is if you want to generate a list of the most important risks, you can add risks here. For example, data quality, poor quality data, and that could lead, for example, to external fraud and system security. You can also let the system generate a risk. What it does is it looks at the description of the use case and it generates a likely risk scenario. And of course, again, these cause-effect relationships, so cause of the model, effect in the use case, can be adapted. And then you can do a risk profiling yourself in your traditional use case and assign a risk owner. Now going back to the use case inventory, it's important that usually you first add a use case, and that use case has several different aspects, like which department it's connected to, how critical it is in the business, the description, purpose, business owners, but you can also have an EOAI obligation checker, meaning that you can classify the risk class as not high risk, and unacceptable risk. And if you don't know what your use case is, you can go through this very easy questionnaire here, which has a couple of, I think, 8 or 10 questions to know to get an indication of what your risk class is in terms of the EU/AI Act and what your obligations are and how they fit into the software. And it really is simple. So even if you don't know stuff, like for example, whether you're a provider or deployer, you can still generate an estimation of the risk class. All right, let's assume that you've now built up a use case inventory and a model inventory. What you want to do now is you want to assess the use case and the model. Assessing the model is quite simple. So let's choose, for example, this XGBoost credit risk score. You can choose which tests you want to execute. In this case, I will not fill out the accountability and safety tests because they are questionnaires that you have to go through. Depending on the class of model you have a different type of set of questions that you'll be asked to steer the test into the right direction. Like, for example, what kind of model you have, what kind of performance metrics you're using for the model, what protected characteristic you can discriminate against in the use case, then protected group labels, model, and the training and validation data set, and then you execute. And what you can see is when it executes, it runs through all of these tests and metrics. You can see the progress in the progress bar, and then it builds up the results. Now for large language models, it's a bit different. For large language models, we do all of this. First of all, you have different tests, of course, but then you also have a different setup. So we go through API endpoints to the input and output of the model. So you can first of all say what kind of API you have. Do you have a custom API, or do you use one of for example, Microsoft Azure, OpenAI, or another system? What kind of LLM you have? What kind of endpoint? So you have to define the endpoint, build an API key, and then this is generated automatically. What would be good is if you could give an evaluation data set. That means a data set that contains the context and question-answer pairs to evaluate the model. And once you've done that, you can again execute, and what you'll see is that it now also runs through and will give a result shortly. Then also interesting is you can build up your own dashboard with your own portfolio of models. So if you have a couple of models, what you can see is that how these models behaved over time, for example, in terms of performance and robustness, what their risk exposure is, their value at risk at the 95th percentile, and what, for example, here the 2 riskiest models are, and where they're risky. But you can also export this either as JSON or CSV, or you can upload your report template and then download this automatically. Lastly, there's also a settings page where you can set your thresholds, your risk thresholds and quality thresholds throughout your company or use case by use case, and therewith determine your risk policies and link them to the threshold. So for example, you could say only if everything is in minimal risk, I can roll out the system or move to the next stage of putting it into production.